Pelvic Floor PT. Let's talk about the pelvis. One of the things I have learned in my years of being a physical therapist is that in order to understand what we're talking about, being able to see in 3D what is actually happening with your pelvic floor is super helpful. So that's what I want to talk about today. So this is a life-size model of the pelvis. This is what we've got going on inside of our bodies. There's a bump on the front of the pelvis bone here and here. My blood vessels like to fall down. The pubic bone is in the front right here. This is the bladder. This is the uterus. And then the rectum is cut short, but it's in the back there. You can barely see it. So that's what we're looking at when we talk about the pelvis. I'm gonna pull it out of its stand here and set that aside for a minute. Okay. So this is the pelvis. If we rotate the pelvis now, so we're looking from the bottom up, this is where we can see our pelvic floor muscles. So the pubic bone in the front here, the sit bones are on the sides here and there, and then the coccyx or tailbone is this little guy right here. We have the urethra, the vagina, and then the anus here. There are two layers of muscle in our pelvic floor. A superficial layer that sits just under the surface of the skin, and then a deeper layer that sits a little bit farther inside. There are a lot of muscles that make up the superficial layer. Some of those muscles are depicted here. There's a muscle that goes from like the front where the clitoris is, a muscle that goes here to the sit bone on either side. There's a muscle that goes from the sit bone across to the other sit bone. There's a muscle that circles around the urethra and the vagina, a little one here as well. And then we've got the external urethral sphincter and the external anal sphincter that are all part of the pelvic floor muscles superficial layer. We also have a deeper layer, like I talked about. You can see those muscles here on either side of the anal sphincter. But if we open up the model, then we can see a little bit more clearly. So I'm gonna put that there. Okay, so now we're looking at a view from the inside. So this is a sideways shot. The pubic bone is right here in the front. The urethra would be here, the vagina would be here, and the anus would be here. Sacrum down to the tailbone right there. So that's what we're looking at here. These superficial muscles, we have three of them. There's one that begins at the pubic bone, comes back behind the rectum, and then slingshots up to the front. There's one that starts next to that, comes back behind the rectum to the tailbone, and then there's one that starts farther off to the side and goes straight over to the tailbone. These three muscles make up that deep layer of the pelvic floor. When we put the two halves of the model together, they make up a diamond shape, like that. And when these muscles engage, they lift and they close. When they release, they lower and they open. So when we're talking about doing Kegels, we're talking about activating the pelvic floor muscles. The motion that we want to feel in our muscles is a lift and a close. Not just a close and not just a drawing up and in, but a drawing up, in, and together. And then when we release, they lower and they open. If you're trying to push out a baby in labor, you want to lower and open even further in order to get your pelvic floor muscles out of the way. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the pelvic floor muscles and where they sit. Let me put the model back together so that you can see from the inside, all of that basket full of muscles, that is all pelvic floor muscle. So much of it, which is why it is such an important muscle group to strengthen, and then more importantly even, to have good coordination in.